News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes, on demand on YouTube. And now, thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we are syndicated and distributed to cable systems serving an additional 12 million households. I'm your host, Gary Baumgarten. Well, look, the news media, who many of us have been frustrated about their coverage of the elections in the past, really stepped in at this time. They anointed Barack Obama as the winner of the New Hampshire primary before the primary ever began by relying on polls, and they showed him to have a double-digit lead over Hillary Clinton, who then came on the very next day to beat Obama fairly handedly. They are precluding certain legitimate candidates whose names are on the ballot in the various primaries from participating in the various debates. They just keep getting it wrong. And as a result, you and I, the voters, are ill-served. Now, I know this is a global audience, but as I always say when we discuss the presidential election in the United States, what happens here, the election of the leader of the free world, the election of the president of the country that casts the biggest shadow over the rest of the globe, obviously affects everybody else, politically, culturally, sometimes militarily. Our foreign policy affects everybody. Our foreign policy in terms of commerce affects everybody. So I decided we better bring in the preeminent expert on this issue in the United States of America, Accuracy in Media editor Cliff Kincaid. He believes the poor performance of the pollsters and the press in the New Hampshire primary was almost predictable. He says the conservative media have been out of touch with Republican voters. That was shown in Iowa as well, missing the Mike Huckabee phenomenon there. And they seem to be mystified, horrified even by the conservative limited government appeal that lies at the heart of the Ron Paul revolution, who they now preclude from participating in the debates, even though Ron Paul has raised as much money as Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So doesn't that make him a quote-unquote legitimate candidate? And Kincaid says the liberal media is missing the story of what's happening, obviously, on the Democratic side of the ticket. And the result of all this, I would argue, Cliff, and I welcome you back. You've become a good friend of this show, and we thank you for spending a few moments with us, is that people are not turning out to vote. I'm looking at the very latest story that was moved by the Associated Press about the primary tomorrow in Michigan. It says, and I'm quoting here, voter turnout is expected to hover around 20% in Tuesday's presidential primary. 20%! You have the opportunity to elect the most powerful politician in the world, or participate in the process toward the election of the most powerful politician in the world, and you don't even show up to vote. Is that, Cliff Kincaid, really the fault of the voter, or is this an indication of the voters are telling the politicians they've had it with the process, including the way the news media is covering things?
It could be, Gary, a lot of the above and more. I would remind you, though, that in Iowa, the Democratic turnout was about 240,000, almost twice that of the Republicans, which I think suggests that there's a lot more activity, more energy on the Democratic side. Clearly, I think the American people, though, are disgusted by the process. They're alienated, especially by the news coverage, the constant preoccupation with polls and the horse race. I've already seen a couple polls already indicating the public really wants no more part of this so-called news coverage of the campaign. The media are driving people away from the polls, I'm afraid to say.
I think so, and you know, I have a little tip for the bosses at the big media outlets, news media outlets. Get an account here on Paltalk, and I'm not saying this facetiously or self-servingly, and go into the social issues category and see what people are discussing when it comes to the election, and just see what topics they find is important to them. and then look at your coverage and the way you're running the debates, and you'll find that the things that are important to the people, by and large, aren't even being discussed by you, by your reporters, by your pundits, nor by the people who are moderating the debates. Cliff Kincaid, the editor of Accuracy in Media, I would suggest to you that it just comes down to the simple fact that the news media are out of touch, out of step, unaware of what is important to the American people.
I think that's a big part of it, Gary. I think another part of it is that the media interject themselves into too many of these discussions. Even the debates, and I love debates. I want to see more debates. I do not think, in line with your quotation earlier, should be in the business of arbitrarily deciding who qualifies as a viable or legitimate candidate. But I do believe that some of these debates would be better served if we eliminated the moderators and just let the candidates have at one another. I'm reminded of the Sunday, January 16th Fox News debate, which arbitrarily excluded Ron Paul, that you had Chris Wallace, the moderator, on one side and the 5 candidates on the other. And it almost looked like a firing squad. And I think that Chris Wallace really got in the way, and I don't think his questions were that good. And I'd rather just put the candidates up there and let them debate each other, let them interrupt one another. I think that's the way it should be. There's no, I go around college campuses. I'm going to a few this year debating a liberal left-wing so-called progressive news analyst. And for the most part, we engage in the debates on our own. We don't even need a moderator. And so I think the American people are tired of the media, number one, telling them what to think, telling them who's up, who's down, telling them how they rate in the polls, and then trying to tell us what issues are legitimate and not.
And it's not just Ron Paul. Duncan Hunter has been precluded. Dennis Kucinich has been precluded. I'm not shilling for any of these candidates, ladies and gentlemen. That's not the issue. I believe that you and I, as voters, and people around the world who are discerning and want to know what's going on with the political process in the United States and what's in store for them based on who we vote for, I have a right to hear what each of these candidates have to say, and the parties determine who's on the ballot. If the party determines that an individual is on the ballot, then that individual, I believe, should be invited to the party. The guest is Accuracy in Media editor Cliff Kincaid, who is not at all surprised with the way the media got it wrong in New Hampshire and the continued missteps by the people who we consider colleagues on a certain level. Very, very unfortunate, Cliff. Let's get to a few of the callers, because I know we only have you for the first half hour of the show. Jan is joining us from California. Jan, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com.
Thanks, Gary. Here in California, I've complained for many years about the media and the way they're handling the election nights even, yet alone these primary elections. When your polls close on the East Coast, people are just getting off work and they're heading to the polls. And you have the news media using these exit polls they're taking, and they're calling the presidential candidates and what's been passed and what hasn't. And here in California, we've got like 52 elections